guys all ready?
Mm-hmm.
Is Jay ready?
They're ready.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the Finance meeting to order at 7:35. I'll take a roll call. I am Trustee Judy Abraham. I am the Finance Chair. To my left,
Trustee Andrea Senior.
Trustee John Tierney.
Finance Director Timothy Hicks.
Budget Officer Tom Hood.
good evening and welcome residents to our meeting and to our audience at home. Thank you for joining us. At this point, at this time, I'd like to stand and take the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to take a moment of silence or reflection, please. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay. Our agenda items for tonight, for our July 10th, 2019 Finance Committee meeting. As far as the public comments, if everybody doesn't mind, I'd like to put that at the end after the presentation. So is that okay with the board up here? Okay, thank you. So residents, if you do have any questions, we'll do it at the end, so then you can hear the presentations and if you have any questions at that time, okay? Next item on the agenda is discuss year-to-date financials for May 2019.
Okay. So revenues for the month of May, the first month of the new fiscal year, we collected $1 million in revenue. We had a little over $1 million in expenses for a net deficit of $44,000. That's versus just a straight line 1 month budget of about $1.2 million in revenue. So, 1 month in, we're probably about $250,000 behind, a straight line budget for revenue. From a expense standpoint, we would, if you straight line the expenses on over 12 months, the revenue, the expenses would be $1.2 million. So we would be favorable of about $150,000 for this 1 month. And that concludes the report for May's financials.
Trustee Andrea, do you have any comments or questions for Director Hicks?
I do not.
Trustee Tierney?
Yeah, where did that deficit come from? Was there a couple different items or different things that happened or occurred to put us below?
Really, when we look at it, you look at Public Works, there's a piece of equipment that was purchased in the month of May that was probably $161,000 that we need to reclass out to the capital fund. That's the big driver there. Everything else is either favorable or flat to budget.
Okay, that's all I have.
Do you know what item it was that they had purchased?
I believe it was
The snow trucks.
yeah,
The plow, well, the
yeah,
new plow.
Salt. Ford 350s or something like that. It was equipment that was budgeted as part of the capital, the bond that we just issued.
Right,
We're
right.
just now
That's
getting
what's
to
You
spend
just
it.
now get it. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because that was like a 6 to 7 month lead time on those those vehicles.
Okay.
So yeah.
There's a few. Okay. All right. No other questions?
Nope.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the water rate presentation. Madam Mayor, did you have anything to say, or do you want to wait until after he does his presentation?
I'll do both ways.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, Finance Committee, residents, and our viewers that watch us stream live. The water rate proposal is something that we've been working on for the past 2 years since I've been in this administration. And it's time for us to start evaluating best practices as it relates to how we look at increases. So working with our budget officer and our finance director,
and the village administrator, we did some extensive research on the presentation that you all are about to see tonight. And the purpose of us reviewing this matter is because in the water fund is starting to decrease, and that should be a healthy fund as it relates to when we have major events that happen, like a major water main may break, and we need to have the funds to replenish that or fix that water main. We have some issues. We have aging infrastructure, and in the past administration, they didn't address those issues. So we had obstructionists on the board at the time. We had a not so aggressive mayor to address these issues or concerns. And so politics took a role in where it put Broadview in position. So when you go through this presentation tonight that Director Hicks is going to present to you all will see the historical information on how we got to this and how we get to the number and how we get to rebuild our water fund to make it healthy once again. So I just want you guys to have an open mind. Whatever questions that you all have, please ask them tonight, because this is something that I would like the board to move forward with or have a further discussion as we go through this. Most certainly, we don't like to hear the word increase, but if we educate the residents and our business partners on the purpose and the reason for the increase, and everybody have a clear understanding of what's taking place as it relates to the Chicago increase that took place several years ago, the increases that's been implemented through Chicago and the Broadview Water Agency. And you will see in this presentation that Broadview is the only village in the township that didn't take advantage of the increases as they got. So we got on our backs the increases, but we didn't increase gradually as the increases came from Chicago or the Broadview Water Agency. So tonight, I just want you guys to have an open mind, look at the information, ask whatever questions that you may have. But in order for our village to continue to thrive in the right direction, we have to address these concerns. And some of the concerns that concern me is our water infrastructure. A major project that we just took initiative on is the smart meters. So when you look at all of those initiatives and we become in compliance and we become more efficient in how we do the day-to-day operations, you will see that we have to stay above stagnant. We have to start challenging ourselves to move into an excellent mode. And so this presentation is going to take us through that process. It's going to give you some historical data where the board will be able to make a sound, good judgment on the behalf of the residents that put us in position to make these types of decisions. But most certainly just know that it's not an easy discussion for us to have, but it's necessary as a part of my administration is being transparent and accountable to this village that we care about and how we move the village forward. So at the end of the presentation, whatever questions that you have for the finance director or the budget officer or myself, we're here to address those concerns. Most certainly I'm here because that's how important it is to me to be transparent and be accountable. And if we're all going to be accountable, it takes place with all of us. That's the residents, this administration, and our business partners. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are you gentlemen ready for the presentation? To the trustees, please take your notes. And then we'll let them get through the presentation, and then we'll ask. You just can ask, okay? Trustee Tierney, is that all right?
Yes.
We'll let them go through everything, and then when we come back up here, we'll
That good enough?
All right. So we're here to talk about the Water and Sewage Fund. Just want to give a description of the fund. It accounts for the operation of the sewage and collection system and the water distribution system. Due to its business nature, so this is the water fund operates as a profit type of fund, which is called an enterprise fund. Okay, so here's the definition of enterprise fund. So basically, an enterprise fund is supposed to be able to charge for the goods or services that it's offering to the public on a continuous basis and be financed and recover the cost of providing that service based on charges to the users. So the water bill should be able to support the cost of issuing the water, so to speak. All right. So when you talk about what does the fund consist of, it consists of the sewer usage and then also your water usage. The expenses consist of the fees from the city of Chicago that they charge to the Broadview Water Joint Water Agency. The water agency in turn adds a surcharge onto that, and they charge the village fees for the water. The maintenance and repair of the water and sewer system, the administrative cost of utility billing and collection, and then potentially in the future, any debt service costs that we would want to pay out of the fund, which we don't have it as of today. So if we look at historically, the revenues have been pretty much flat. It's been about $3.4 to $3.5 million. But as you look at the costs have gone up from 3.4 to where we are thinking that it would be for fiscal 20, about $5.4 million, which means that we went from recovering all of the costs in 2016, basically flat, earning a little money in 2017 and 18, to fiscal 19 and 20 to where we're losing money significantly in the $2 million range. So if you look, the fund balance started off around $10.7 million, and that is quickly dwindling to about projected ending balance for fiscal 20 of about $7 million. So when you look at historic profitability, so this is basically just the margin that we earn on the water that we've been charging the residents versus the operating expenses. You can see from fiscal 16 to fiscal 19, that profit margin has steadily decreased, while the cost of operating expenses has been relatively the same. So when we look at the water units sold, this is the amount of water that the actual residents and commercial users, industrial users have been using over the past 10 years. That has been relatively the same, with a small dip in around the 2013-14 time period. So factors that are affecting the profit margin, you've heard Director Ames talk about the leak detection that I think costs us about $40,000 a year, every year, and I think our leak percentage is double digits, so that means we're losing about anywhere from 10 to 15% of the water every year. We had obsolete equipment, which led to incorrect meter readings. If you have incorrect meter readings, then that leads to incorrect billing. There was a disconnect between the village's system and the water agency system, and then we had some issues with our large industrial customers. So when we look at the water rate increases, so VOB is the Village of Broadview, BWJWD is the Broadview Westchester Joint Water District, and then the City of Chicago. So if you see from 2009 to 2019, there's been an increase every year by both the Water Agency and the City of Chicago every year except for 2011. And when you look at the village has only taken increases in 2009, 2012, 2013, 14, and 15. And there hasn't been a water rate increase by the village of Broadview since 2015, right? So the next slide, if I can get to it. All right. So what we wanted to show simplistically, if we took $1, right, and we said that the three entities had that same dollar, and then we applied the rate of increase, the amount of increase for all three agencies, and where would we end up? So if you look at the Village of Broadview, right, so we took a 10% increase in 2009, right? So if you just look at all the different increases that have been taken, so 2019, the Village of Broadview took their $1 and took it to $1.56, right? You look at the Water Agency, so taking into consideration all of the increases that they have passed on to the Village of Broadview, they have taken their $1 and turned that into $2.32, okay? You look at the City of Chicago, their $1 went from, in 2008, to $2.62, okay? So what does that mean? That means that, so if we go to the next slide here, that Village of Broadview in 10 years have increased the water rate by 56%, which sounds like a huge number until you compare that to what the City of Chicago has increased their rates and compare that to what the Broadview Westchester Water Agency has increased their rates by. So City of Chicago, 262%. Water Agency, 232%. That means the Village of Broadview has subsidized the residents and the commercial and industrial customers for the past 10 years of about 176%. That's been covered by the village, which is pretty substantial, which support the numbers that we're seeing, which is why we went from a fund balance of about $11 million to where we project to be of about $7 million. And it can go even more drastically going forward. And this doesn't include any infrastructure needs of the water fund. Those are just pure rate based. So we beg, borrow, and steal. So we took this from another presentation of another township. But when you look at, compared to all the other rates in the Proviso Township, if you focus your eyes toward the bottom, that's where you'll find Broadview. And I believe this is probably about 2 years old when you look at these water rates in comparison to some of our neighboring villages. So we're far behind. So we have some of the most affordable water rates in the township. Okay, so what we're proposing, and this is just to capture what hasn't happened, by ordinance, we were supposed to, every time it's either the city or the water agency, every time that they went up, we were, by ordinance, supposed to automatically increase the rates to stay at pace. So we didn't do that. So if we just took that for year one, which would be this fiscal year, we would do a 30-cent increase, which would be 4.5%. And next fiscal year, if we took the difference between where we are today versus where the water agency is currently today and divide that over the next 4 years evenly, then we would take a 10.4% increase in year 2, drop that down to a 9.48% increase in year 3, 8.66% increase in year 4, and a 7.97% increase in year 5. And this is just to make up the difference between where we are currently versus where the water agency is in terms of, and so when you go back to the definition of an enterprise fund, so the purpose of enterprise funds is to account for the cost of providing goods and services to the general public on a continuing basis, and these costs should be financed or recovered primarily through user charges. So the water and sewage fund is never supposed to run at a deficit. It is always supposed to, at the bare minimum, recover the cost of providing the service that we're providing to the residents, right? So if we go back to this slide here, this is the visual that you really want to think about. You take that $1 and we've taken it to $1.56 versus the water agency at $2.32. And the water agency still has some increases that they need to, they're 30 cents below where the city of Chicago has increased their rates to. So we would imagine that at some point they're going to increase their rates as well to make up for that deficit of what they're buying the water from the city of Chicago at. And you can just see, I mean, we start off 10 years ago, we were right there. And then because of inaction, we are significantly outpaced the increases by the water agency as well as the city of Chicago. Short and sweet, to the point. Anybody has any questions? Yes, sir. Should I address the mic?
Let's let the trustees go first, is that
Okay.
okay, Director Hicks? We'll let the trustees go first, and then we'll have the residents.
Can I make a couple points, Tim?
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to back up to the revenue versus cost of water slide number 6?
So trustees, if you want them to identify a certain slide, if your question pertains to that, we'll let them pull it up, is that okay?
Sure.
Director Wood, is that okay then?
Yeah, that's fine.
If they have a specific question related to a slide?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, all right, then they can focus on that, all right.
So we're really focusing on the right side of this graph where the arrow's at, but I wanted to point out, the last time we did a water raise in 2015, it was because we headed, you can see there's a same decline starting in fiscal 9 through 15, and it was really drastic in 15. And we knew this was going to happen at that time, and that's why we raised the rates at that time. So what we're doing here is being proactive. We don't want this to be a major crisis a couple, 2, 3 years down the line. A couple other things I want to point out on this graph. If you look at the operating expenses, and that is directly related to the employees that work in the water department, the billing process, and charges directly related to water operations. It's not the capital improvements, it's not the emergency water mains, it's the operating expenses. That has went down since fiscal 13, and that's been driven a lot by the improvements in the general fund. There used to be quite a few more public works employees that were in this fund. So we've been able to reduce the operating expenses, but we're still having the same issue. If we had the old operating expenses, this would be a much more of a crisis at this time. And back then in 2015, I just wanted to point out, I don't know, I know there's a couple people in here that will remember the meetings at Beverly. we had 3 options. And at that time, to recapture Chicago's historical rates, we would have had to raise the rate to $8.94. There was an option just to raise it at a penny per penny type of raise, an option to raise it as the same percentage as Chicago, which is $6.60, which is the option we chose. Well, the board chose. I recommended to go to the $8.94 and take all the pain at once, but now we're revisiting the issue 4 years later, and the mayor at the time had taken mid-ground at about $7.18. But because we didn't address that problem back in 2015, we're back here today. And I just wanted to point out that when we discussed this with the trustees, there is some history behind this, and if we can get it to an appropriate level, the ordinance should carry us forward, because under ordinance now, any time that there is an increase, we're supposed to pass that right on to the customers. And Chicago's now basing their increases on the Consumer Price Index. That's why if you look at the last couple rate increases have been small. Well, for Chicago, it's been 1.5, 1.8, 1.8. So we shouldn't see these big 15, 25% raises anymore because of the way they've done it. What Chicago was doing was catching up for years that they didn't do it. So it's kind of flowing forward based upon, the raises are based upon activity that's happened years ago at this point. And what this plan is to get us on sound footing, which will allow us to upgrade our water structure, do the projects that need to be done, and we have an ordinance in place that should keep us there going forward. Seems like there was something else I wanted to point out. Let me look real quick. Oh, that fund balance in the water fund, back in 2015 when we did this, the water fund regularly was generating between $600,000 and $800,000 of revenue a year. Now it's down in between the $225,000 to $400,000, and depending on what other expenses occur, if there's a lot of water main breaks, it's actually eaten up all of our profit. That's what's causing the fund balances to go down. I just lost my train of thought. So establishing a good profit margin will allow us to go out and get some low-interest loans, upgrade our infrastructure, and we should be set up to move forward without any issues. That's the only points I had off the top of my head. I'm going to take questions now.
Wait, Trustee Tierney, do you want to go first, or Trustee? Here's the mic.
Tim, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Tim, in the beginning, you mentioned there's some issues with large businesses. Can you address those? What's going on that we have some concerns with them?
I can handle that if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
I believe, but most of it was
It's
the water mains, right? The water meters.
Right.
Tom has specific details.
Over the last, especially starting in 2014-15, there's been a lot of different things that, why is this happening? And one of the things was there was a thought that maybe some of our businesses had large businesses had inaccurate meters, maybe someone was stealing water, even individual houses stealing water. But what we found is there were some bad meters, but it wasn't significant. So our Public Works Department basically went out and checked all the meters at all the industrial sites, all the commercial sites. They were I wouldn't say investigating. They were just looking at everything to make sure it was right. And we said industrial customers, but we also were concerned that, and most people won't know this, that our water system is actually hooked to Westchester and Maywood. There's valves between the towns in case there's an emergency. They made sure those valves were working, that none of them were stuck open, that nobody was sneaking in and opening them for a day or two and then closing. So they did a lot of man hours looking for possible things where people might be taking water that they shouldn't. Some of the other stuff that they did is they did some extensive leak detection activity. They had several different firms come in. They had public works people just driving around town, opening sewer covers to see if there was an inordinate amount of running water in there. And they did find stuff. There was a big break on one of our 12-inch mains they found that had been draining right into the sewer system, going right to the Des Plaines River. So they were good expenditures in the sense that we found problems, but we never found problems big enough to explain this. I believe, and don't, you can correct me on this, I believe that last water report, the water loss rate was 17%. And one of the things we did to address that is we looked into these new high-efficiency water, well, they're electrostatic water meters. And what we found out as we looked into this is that the old mechanical water meters wear out over time. So according to two of the vendors that did presentations here, after about 20 years, they can be off by 10%. So it's not someone stealing water, it's just your meter you're using 1,000 gallons of water, we're only charging you for 900. And as time goes on, that difference goes off more. Some of our meters were in excess of 20 years old. So that was one of the things that we did to address the water loss, and hopefully we will see that number go down with these new meters. And that's the other thing that was listed on the thing, it was obsolete equipment. That kind of answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit. Next question I had was, who determines, I know it comes from the city of Chicago, but what do they base their rates on? Is it consumption? Is it, because I know there's plenty of water in the lake right now. You know, we've got a lot of flooding going on, there's plenty of water, so I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah, so just like, hold on, so we go back to so in the past, there was no rhyme or reason to the amount of increase, and that's why you saw them double digits. They were really just filling their budget gap, to be honest, right? So when you see going from 15, 14, 25, 15%, there was nothing to substantiate that amount of increase. Now, you look at 2017, 18, and 19, they're basing it on inflation, CPI. So it's something that, you know, that everybody can kind of, and I think that's what a lot of villages were after them about, was like, why 15%, right? Yeah. So when they couldn't substantiate that, they went to, you know, and they got all the, you know, probably profit that they needed to get to shore up their budget. So now they're going to a more sensible thing, which is CPI.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay. My question is, for the next 4 years from now, are they planning on doing a 30% increase over to be able to catch it up for the difference?
You're talking about the water agency?
Mm-hmm. You said something about a 30% increase over the next 4 years. So is that what's going to take place here? They're going to be doing an increase from now until the next 4 years to make up for the differences?
Water agency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm a co-chair on the water agency in Westchester, so Mary.
Oh.
I'm not sure of the sound.
Thank you, trustee.
Ladies.
So I co-chair the Broadview Water Agency, and so the concept is with, like Director Hicks said, with the CPI, the agency followed the same platform that the city of Chicago does. So this year, when the Broadview Water Agency increased the water rates, it was 3%.
Okay, and then the other question is, I think it might be the next slide after this one. It says I couldn't get it out. It says something about the city of Chicago water fees charge BWJ WD, and I didn't see what that amount was for. It might have been like the.
It's the one with the columns where you're doing the side-by-side comparison.
Kind of towards the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, right there. Oh, okay. So I was thinking, I thought it was a fee, because I was trying to get it down, and I thought it was actually saying what the Chicago Water's fee, you know, what they were charging.
No, so this is just trying to tell you the makeup of what the expenses are in the fund. So the city of Chicago charges the water agency a rate for them to get the water. Then the water agency in turn charges the village of Broadview a rate to give us the water.
Okay.
So
Right.
that's just kind of how
Right. Yeah.
lack of a better term, chain of command,
Yeah.
chain of custody. But, you know,
It's the
they
agent.
buy the water, then they sell it to us.
Yeah.
They buy it from the city of Chicago, and then they
It's-
sell it to us.
Right.
But
But-
there's a markup, right? From where they're buying it for $1, they're selling it to us for $1.03, right? And so that's what that.
And Katrina can probably inform us more of this than I can, but like Tim said, there's a markup because they maintain the big lines that feed us, feed Westchester. They run the pumping station. So they have a lot of expensive infrastructure that the pumping station 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it's essentially brand new. So they've already sunk a lot of the, they've already taken on the debt to upgrade their infrastructure, and that's why they've raised the price to us. So what's happened is our water sales, more of it goes to them now for them to pay their debt service, and we get to keep a smaller portion. And I just wanted to point this out because this was the big argument in 2015. Nobody wanted to increase at a percentage basis. They wanted to keep it the same. So if it went up 8 cents, we'd go up 8 cents. But the analogy I've thought of since then was this. If you started getting Social Security in 1988 and it never went up, how much would you be buying with that chunk of money today? If it doesn't continue to increase, you're not going to be able to afford to keep up your infrastructure because the pipes cost more, the labor costs more, everything costs more today. And that's why I think it's better to go on the percentage basis than to match them penny for penny in their increases. I lost that argument in 2015, so I'll make it again.
The clerk have a question? The clerk?
Question's been answered? Yes. Trustee Tierney? All right, wait, I got some. I have some. I have a question regarding the general loss of water. You said is what, between 10 and 15%?
Tom corrected me, I think.
Yeah,
from his
that's
recollection,
where
it's
it's
like
been, but I think in the last
17%.
report, if I remember correctly, it was up to 17%.
It was up to 17%.
Right.
But
And,
over that, excuse me, trustee, but over that 10-year time frame, it's been double digits. So it's been
Yeah.
anywhere from 10 to 15%. So every year for the past 10 years, in my recollection from Director Ames, the loss rate has been double digits in that 10 to 15% range for the
Okay, and-
past 10 years.
Well, I know there's not going to ever be an ideal water loss, but I'm sure, are we trying to strive to what, get it below double digit?
You know, I wish Mr. Ames was here to tell us what these numbers, there is an acceptable water loss.
Right, I was just going to say.
Industry-wise, there's acceptable water loss, and the people that we do this report for, you know, there's a number they're looking for. I just don't know what that number is off the top of my head.
Is it normally below 10%, or is
Yeah,
it,
I
do you guys know? I don't want to have you guys,
No, it's safe to say that it's below what we're losing, right?
should be below 10% on our water loss.
Yeah.
Okay. So then how do we, what do we need to be doing as a village to try to, you know, now you're saying it was what, 17%? Is that what you said?
Well, that was,
Yeah.
again, I think that was either
The most
last year's
recent.
report, the most
Yeah.
recent one. everything that we talked about earlier, we have been doing to address this. The
Okay.
water leaks, looking at our industry, looking at the village connections, and the big one, and it really didn't even hit, at least in my mind, I don't know about anybody else, until we started seeing those presentations on the new water meters, how much we could be losing that way. I mean,
Right.
if there's a 10% loss, and we put new meters in, all of a sudden, we'd be right down about 7%.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, I mean, but we won't know for a year, yeah,
Right.
basically, yeah.
Yeah, because you have to kind of let it go through the process and then kind of see how much more we're capturing. Okay.
Exactly.
I think on one of the years you had water units sold, that 2013, 2014, was there a dip? Is that what I saw on the slide?
There is a dip, and.
Was there a dip?
There was a dip.
What happened during that time? Why would there be all of a sudden a dip such as that when you look at the rest of the pattern? Because obviously, I mean, what would be a contributing factor to
was that
have that kind of a
2014, Tim?
dip?
2014?
That means sold to what? Homes, businesses, our big industrial?
That's everybody, that's all customers.
Could have been a heavy rain, where you didn't have the water as much.
Residents didn't have the water grants,
Water, flowers.
Wait, I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
residents wouldn't have to use as much water during the summer season because of the heavy rain.
Yeah, because that's just, if you look at it, because then the rest of the way, if you look at that graph,
Yeah.
you know,
So that's
8,
just-
9, 10, 11, and then all of a sudden you have that big dip that happened right around, what, 2014?
Right.
You know, what's interesting, and I'm just looking at the underlying data.
2012 was 2013 was a heavy rain season.
Yeah.
We're gonna have another heavy rain season
And you think there's going to be a dip in the water units sold? Okay.
Looking at the underlying data, the one thing that really stands out here, because I see there's 4 different classes.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead,
There's
Director Hood.
commercial, government, residential, and industrial.
Right,
They all have a dip at that time. So it's not like one thing that I can point to. It's
Okay.
not like there was it wasn't like a Mullins closed and we lost a big customer or something like that.
right.
Each one of them dips and then gradually comes back after that year.
Okay, all right, I didn't know how much investigation you guys did into that, noticing that dip, because I'm saying, you know, unless like a big, you know, customer of ours, such as in the industrial park, had moved out, obviously you would see, you know, if they're not using that facility, and I'm just trying to figure out what happened in that time frame. You know, houses, you know, people
We didn't
use-
go that far, we just took the raw data and plopped it in a graph.
Okay, okay.
So,
I didn't know how much investigation you did into that, that's why I was asking that question. You answered my question regarding the loss of revenue with our large industrial customers. Thank you, Trustee Tierney, for mentioning that. I saw that. Again, getting back to fiscal year 15, the lowest revenue and cost of water, I think that was on a slide.
Slide 6.
Yeah, it was, what was the, do you know some history on that? Why was that such another big gap right there?
Because we hadn't passed on those big increases
Okay.
from the prior years. Let's see. So in Chicago, before then, it went 25, 15, 15, so there's 55% increase in the base.
Okay,
But what we were paying for water, and then we weren't passing that on, so what used to be our revenue was then going on back to the city of Chicago or to us, we buy it from the Broadview Joint Water District. But that's it, and that's what caused the crisis in 2015. You know, if, I'm just looking at 2012, if they raise the price 25%, we only raise it 8%. It doesn't take long. I mean, 25, we raised it 8%. They went up 15, we raised it 6%. It went up 15, we raised it 8%. I mean, it just, what used to be our profit then became essentially Chicago's profit, because, you know, it kind of
Exactly.
passes right through the Broadview Joint Water District.
exactly,
Yeah.
because you got two different entities that are obviously passing on water rate increases, and the Village of Broadview obviously didn't keep,
Yeah.
what do you call it? What's that word? Kept in, pass-through. We weren't matching what was going on in the reality of things, and now we have such an issue here with the difference.
Well,
So-
and during that time, not only, because there's a lot of other factors into here. The economy was bad. There were a lot of foreclosures. There was a lot of talk about we're putting this on our residents at a tough time. Even the Broadview Westchester Joint Water District didn't pass it on all the costs to us. So in 2012, even though the Chicago raised it 25, the water district only raised it 19.
Okay.
So, yeah, but it's still, then we only raised it 8, so still.
That's a big gap.
It's the same reason. It's really the main reason that's causing this problem.
Okay. Director Hicks, did you want to add anything to that? What he was saying, just with the difference and stuff? Okay, good. Oh, you mentioned also the fund generating, the fund balance, where it's at now, the depletion. So basically, our fund balance is what? Lower than what it should be? You guys have expectations for it, I would imagine? And we've been kind of what? Just covering what the Broadview Westchester Water Agency has been passing through, as well as the city of Chicago. Is that why we kind of have that?
Well,
that
we
gap?
haven't been covering. That's the problem. So that's why you see, you go back to 2018, 17, 18, we were making, a little money in the fund, right, to losing money in for fiscal 19 and projected for fiscal 20. So that's why you're seeing the fund balance go down so drastically, so quickly. And if you can see, you just imagine if we're at 7 and we're losing $2 million a year, it's only so soon before
That'll be zero, right?
be zero
Right.
in the
Or negative.
And when that happens, that means that not only are we subsidizing the customers, but then the village as a whole is subsidizing the water fund, because any negative expenses or deficit in the water fund has to be covered by the general fund.
Okay.
So
So that's your worst case scenario.
That's your worst
If
case
we don't
scenario.
address it
So
in
if
a
we-
timely fashion, you're saying then all of a sudden our general fund would then have to start.
covering the water fund.
Cutting the water fund, right.
Okay.
So it's like what you were asking about a target. The target should be something above break even. I mean, break even should be our worst case scenario because we're just treading water at that point. But in a perfect world, we'd make money, and then every few years we'd have a pile of money which we could use on water main replacements, et cetera.
Right, the infrastructure.
But our infrastructure is so old and in such dire need of fixing, we need to get this extra income stream to go out and get one of these low-interest loans that are available to municipalities to get our pipes fixed now, before we have major breaks, major problems like some other villages have had.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. Obviously, and I know Director Ames isn't here, but would you say how much of a percentage of our pipes, as you say, are, exceeding their life expectancy? Do we have a number on that, or is it beyond that? Mayor, did you want to handle that? Thank you.
Yeah, so the infrastructure for the agent water mains, the average age of our mains is about 60 years old. And so the average life expectancy of a water main is between 85 and 100 years old. So we're getting close to, we do have aging infrastructure. And so we do have to take that into consideration. So when you talk about the infrastructure on the alleys that go east and west from 17th to 25th, the reason why those haven't been done, and that infrastructure been in place for quite some time, like a number of years, those haven't been replaced because it didn't make sense to replace the water mains, and we have to reconstruct the alleys. So we're trying to get a 2-for-1 when you look at that type of situation. But we do have aging infrastructure in the village of Broadview. As you are aware, that the village is about 114 years old. So just think about all of the sewer lines and the infrastructure that was implemented during that time when the village got incorporated. So our infrastructure is about that old. I think, was it, Tom, on Roosevelt and 17th, the water mains that need to be?
1920 something. When it broke, I knew this because when they replaced it, it was actually stamped on the pipes of what year it was. It was like 1921.
And then not only that, when you look at the infrastructure and you change the infrastructure with the state, with the the IPA, the mandate that they put on us that we have to have infrastructure in place that's not lead-based. So we have to consider all of those costs that's included with that. So it's a big cost to us as we move the village forward, but those are things that, regardless of what administration is in place, we have to think forward on how we look at infrastructure. And those are the things, when we talk about costs like this and increasing our costs, we see the tangible, like right now, it's hitting our pockets right now, but we have to think of the unknown, the unforeseen circumstantial things that take place. And when you think about water mains and infrastructure underground and stuff, the average resident don't articulate that because that's something they can't see. But it's something that we use. So we have to take this time out to really educate our residents and our business partners on the infrastructure of what takes place. So that's why it was so important for me to be here by me co-chairing the Water Agency Board and kind of knowing and learning that process on how the water is, how we get water, how we change the infrastructure on water mains, what 17-inch water mains is. And I mean, it's a lot. But the average resident or the average president of our local businesses, they don't care about that. They just see the cost that's impacted them at this time. But we have to take the time out to educate them on the things that matter on how we keep the village moving forward, but how we don't make it a huge burden on us because we're all impacted by the change. Nobody is exempt, right? So, but we have to be conscious on what that look like, but we can't play the games. We have to be upfront, we have to be transparent, and we have to be accountable on how we educate our community on economics. And the water infrastructure is economic infrastructure that most people don't understand. I didn't understand it. But I'm learning as I go through this process as being the mayor of Broadview and being the co-chair of the water agency, I'm learning what that process looked like for all of us. So we want to make sure that we get all the questions answered on what that looked like for us because the infrastructure, you don't see it, but you feel it because you have to pay the bill every month.
So just to add to that, I believe when we did put together the study with Director Ames to repair and to be proactive with the infrastructure, it's like $50 million, right? So what that means is that there's a lot of repair that needs to happen and replacements that need to happen to be proactive, that you do some of those things today so that 50 years from now, you're not dealing with the same, or you're having more issues. Because what we're doing now, if you really look at it, and let's be blunt, we're just putting Band-Aids on the issue, right? When something breaks, we fix that piece and then we move on, right? So that is not the best approach to proactively deal with a known problem. Like, this is a known issue. So that's all we're doing. We're putting Band-Aids on issues, and we're not dealing with the root cause. So the root cause and to be proactive is what we're trying to do, which at a minimum is to get the water rates to a state where we won't be in a position where the village will not only be subsidizing the customers, but also subsidizing the fund, and then also getting to the point where we have significant cash flow that we can prove that we would be worthy of borrowing money from get these low interest rate loans, that we can proactively go out and say we're going to do X number of projects every year within a certain budget, and making sure that we're dealing with the root cause. Because right now, when you look at it, a water main break, we replace that piece of water main that is broken, and then we wait for the next break to happen. That's what we do.
Well, and I know I want to thank the mayor for bringing her insight into this and discussing that, because again, and you bringing up the point that we have pipes that were stamped 1921. Well, think back in 1921, we didn't have the industry that we have now. We didn't have the businesses as developed as they are along Roosevelt Road or even the Broadview Village Square. I mean, that wasn't around. So the impact, and I understand that, and I know we've had a discussion before, Director Hicks and Director Hood, regarding, I kept asking, why can't we just redo an entire section at a time? But again, it's us building our credibility as a village and our dollar, but then also having, like you said, the fund dollars available and able to go out to get a low-interest loan, you know, and I know what we're doing in the meantime is constantly replacing, you know, and now looking at this overview of rate increases that the city of Chicago has passed through to the Broadview Water Agency, and myself being a member. So I definitely know what's been going on there, as well as being a member to the Broadview Westchester Water Agency with the mayor. It's just something I don't think if the village, you know, at that time, and who was managing as the mayors, you know, or just with the direction they were going in, didn't really look at it thoroughly to see that this fund had to be healthy, has to maintain, and for us to do more, obviously, like you said, so we can get a section of town to have these old aging pipes to be replaced. Mm-hmm. So again, I think now going forward, you know, my view, and I'm sure the trustees that are here today that are finding out the information, and again, this is, you know, our finance meetings are open to anybody to attend, to kind of see where we're at financially. I want us to be in a position because, again, we have major businesses in here that are expanding, right? So with that being said, and there's others that want to come in here, we have to have some type of infrastructure, and I appreciate Director Ames letting you know which ones and stuff like that needs to be replaced. It's just now us, how do we find the money? And again, I appreciate what you guys did on this presentation, Director Hicks, Director Hood. I think it was very well done. It definitely is an eye-opener to see where we're at, where we should be, and if we would have been consistent and did those gradual increases, you know, I think we would have been more in line, and our fund wouldn't be down to, you said, where's it roughly at?
7 million.
Yeah, I think it was
7 million, and then the fund balance was between, what, 225,000 to 400?
No,
Where
the
in
fund balance,
2015, you said it was around 800,000, so, you know, you're talking in a 4-year span, it got cut in half, right? Am I correct on that numbers? With the 2015, 800,000 fund generating?
Yeah, that's like the profit back in the early part. But before 2015, it was bringing in about 600 to 800,000. Now we're down below 400,000. So it's
Right, and if
decreased
there's a major
significantly.
issue,
Right, yeah.
right, if there's a major issue, we can be, you know, very much in trouble. And I really don't want to, I really would like to avoid that, so.
So it's very similar to the Village Hall, right? We were being penny wise and dollar foolish, right? So anytime anything broke in Village Hall, it was $500,000, $750,000, $1 million, right? So when you continuously have those type of costs, and then you're just repairing that stuff, right? So
Well, it's more costly.
right.
'Cause
So
it's repair-
over the long run, so
Yeah.
you're being, and it's the same issue. So there's two components to it. One is that we have, as a village, haven't kept up with the cost to provide the service to the customers, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is that we have never addressed strategically how to fix and maintain and strategically think about the aging infrastructure. So it's two pieces to it.
Yeah.
One, we gotta solve the first one before we think about it. We can't even get to the second one if we don't
Without
solve
solving
the first one. Right?
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right, absolutely
You know.
right. Madam Mayor, did you want anything to add before we go back up there to trustees? Mr. Clerk? Mr. Clerk, did you have a question?
I just had a couple of questions. Director Hicks, while we're on this slide, we were just talking about the increases. If we have the proposed increases that you have listed, how will they increase our revenues to hopefully catch up with the expenditures to get that fund balance from 7 million to where we need it to be? How much would the fund balance increase each year?
I
With the
believe it was
proposed
only,
increases.
was about $300,000, and that's just off the top of my head. I think Tom has.
I was just looking to see if I had it here. Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's the initial increase is not that much, right? It's a 30-cent increase. We wouldn't apply it to all customers. We would strategically, go out because our large industrial customers, that's a pretty substantial increase to them. They're already at a higher rate, but this was an overall and on average. But I believe it was only about $300,000.
Yeah.
So, and then if you think about the increases were twice that, so you're looking at anywhere from 400 to 600,000 every year. That would be increasing.
Okay. Second question is, over the course of the 10 years that we've been subsidizing the difference, how much in actual dollars have we subsidized?
Don't know that
Have you
one.
figured that out?
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Okay.
Good question, though. I would imagine that is a that's
wouldn't be
a pretty,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
correlation
think
to
about
it.
that one. Yeah.
that is a pretty substantial number, right? That would probably be eye-popping.
I mean, if we increased it 8% when the city was doing 15%, and that was the biggest increase we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some either years with no increases or a lot smaller increases. That has to be a big number.
Has to be quite large, I would think.
No, back
Yeah.
to 9. That's the one right there.
Trustees, are you guys done with your questions?
Let's see, just a quick back of the envelope calculation here. Selling 500,000 gallons.
I had a couple other things that I thought of just while I was sitting here. I was able to find, unbelievably, a study that was done in 2014 for the total infrastructure for the village, but it's broken out between streets, water, and sewer. Back in 2014, they estimated $41.5 million. Here we are 5 years later, and that number is closer to $50 million. So that just kind of illustrates what is happening on the expense side, on the capital side. It's costing more to do everything. The labor's more, the parts are more, so the more we put this off, the more we're going to be paying 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and down the line. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, which we didn't even talk about, I just happened to think about it. If they ever get their act together in Washington, they're talking about doing a $2.2 trillion infrastructure basically program. If we are in a situation where we have the revenues to support like an IEPA loan, and they have matching loans coming out of Washington, we will be in a much better position to get our $50 million worth of work done for maybe 25.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're
Yeah.
absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And I guess there's other contributing factors, just with finance directors that weren't consistent over, a few years. So I'm sure that inconsistency caused a lot of that time where our rate increases,
Right.
because it was just hard, who was projecting, and then, so we were put in some situations, I would imagine, during some of those years as well. But you're absolutely right. I think our credibility as a village is better because I think we've generated more stability, with the mayor, with you guys in finance, knowing where our numbers are at, the direction we're going in these last 2 years that just have passed. I just think our credibility is much greater. So, that's why I always said, why can't we just get a loan from the government so we can get this done with infrastructure? So I just think, I feel we should be in better position. But again, we still have to get some things right? You still have to check every box. So, and again, you can see what's going on in our village with development. So, Madam Mayor, you said you had something to add before I give it to the
So
presidents?
we have a new governor. J.B. Prisser is our new governor, and he has passed a capital bill for this fiscal year. So things are looking promising for us in the village of Broadview as well as in the state now that we have a functioning budget at the state level. So what I did was we worked with the department heads and we got a capital list together on just everything that's a capital list that we can actively go after every single year in the budget. So the bill that I submitted to our state rep and our state senator, the capital projects grand total was $30,158,000. That's more than our budget, our fiscal budget, right? When we look at water mains, and for the purposes of this conversation, when we look at water mains, what came out of the public works on water mains that needed immediately attention was the Gardner Road water main, which is $645,000. We did request the board to approve for us to go after IEPA loan, low interest for improvements. But for those improvements to get done, it's like almost $6 million. And then we have the 17th Avenue water main improvements. That's a $1 million project. So when you look at the cost of water mains that need to be done as it relates to capital projects and infrastructure as it relates to our water mains, we are on target and we are on the radar, and we do have an active lobbyist that was working on our behalf to make sure these issues are addressed, not just with our local legislators, but the legislators that they have to interact across the room to get these things done for Broadview. So in this year's budget, we got allocated $2 million for a project, and then the fire department got another $250,000 to do a project. So the list is starting to decrease, but it wasn't what but we have a list. And so the list consists of what's a shovel-ready project, because that's what the state looks at. What's a shovel-ready project? So we are in position to make sure that all projects that's in the capital infrastructure, whether it's a water main, roadway, streetscape, parking lots, et cetera, we have a plan. And so we submitted 4 shovel-ready projects. And so as we knock those shovel-ready projects out and the revenue start coming in for us to get the projects done, then we go on to a preliminary status. And that's a status where we have the engineers tell us exactly what the cost is going to be, and we start preparing financially for that cost, and then we start preparing to move it to a shovel-ready project. So when funding becomes available for those respective categories, we're in position to receive. So we are probably one of the better villages that's in position on receiving funding. And so, I mean, those are the 2 things that I know that we are in the capital budget for the $2 million and the $250,000 for this budget year. So things are looking up for us, but it's a process. And we all have to work together and get an understanding on the process so that everybody is clear and that we're transparent and we accountable, as well as our state senator and our representative are held accountable to the village of Broadview, as well as the Cook County commissioner, because they actually have dollars that can support Broadview as well. And we actively work very hard every single day, the department heads. They work very hard to make sure that we are at the table and that we are engaged when we start talking about the money, because for many years, Broadview had not been receiving like the other towns. And so now it's time for us to, I don't know, this may not be the correct word, but it's time for people to ante up and give back to Broadview, because we have been lacking for so many years of not receiving. So things are looking up for us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for that. Residents, who has any questions here? Ms. Redmond?
Okay, yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you, Mayor and Finance Committee and administrators. I've got several questions. And first of all, let me just say this. I understand our infrastructure is old, okay? And I understand that we have to fix it. But I want a clear clarification and a little more detail. And I think learning from the last time we had this conversation, which I was at that meeting and many of you may have been or may not have been, it was not so much the residents was against having the increase, it's understanding what it was going to be and making sure it was going for the purposes it was going to go for. So here's a few questions that I had as I listened to the presentation. You said the water fund is an enterprise fund. Okay, does revenue only come from water sales, or can monies be transferred from the general fund to the water fund? Can other monies be put in that fund?
Yeah, you can transfer money in, but that's not the purpose of the water fund. And it's, from an accounting standpoint, that's not best practices.
Okay, no, I
and so-
understand, but
yeah.
we could do it if we had to.
It would only be in the instance that we described, where the water fund is losing money and you were obligated to fund from another fund to get it to be at a break even. That would be the only scenario where you would transfer money into the water fund.
Okay. Okay, the other questions I have. On the chart, you had the operating expenses for like 2019 on one of these slides, that it was gonna be like 5.8 million the expenditures for 2019 and 5.4 million for 2020. And then on your chart where you showed operating expenses, that's going down,
So
what's
let me
the
stop you
cost
there.
for the increase?
So
Capital.
the expenditures here on this is all expenditures.
And
not
what are
just
they?
So this is
Generally, yeah.
all the expenses that are charged to the water fund. What you're seeing on this chart is just the operating expenses, which is basically the salaries,
Water bills.
and the cost of the water for the water fund. So just the operating cost. So this doesn't include water main breaks, the repair costs that we would do.
So infrastructure.
It doesn't include any of that. This is just salaries and the cost of the water that we pay to Broadview.
So on your chart then, is that 2 million anticipate for the capital projects that you're gonna do? Is that what the increase of the expenditures are? That you have, or is it just the increase of things going up and is expensive?
It's both. It's in there, you have the cost of the water meters.
Okay,
And then you also have the cost of the increase from the water, and then also the fact that we're actually being a little more proactive in the fact that we're not waiting for, there's two things. There's a couple switches from this administration to last administration. Prior to this administration, when we had a water main break, we just repaired that water main, right? So whatever was needed just to repair it, now we're replacing that water main, right? So there's significant cost to that. So that's putting a Band-Aid on it, what we were doing before. Now we're taking that whole water main out. So we could have had a break that was just from here to there, right? Prior, we was just putting a Band-Aid on the water main from here to there. But what we're doing now is we know that from here to that seat, but also to the wall may be affected. So we're replacing all of that. Because if you have a break here, the likelihood is that you're gonna have a break somewhere else down the line. Mm-hmm. And so prior to this administration, we just put that Band-Aid on, and then we waited for the other part to break, and then we just put a Band-Aid over there.
and
right?
we paid about the same that we could have replaced it, because I was here at those
I'm not
meetings.
sure
Well,
what,
I'm just
but-
gonna tell you, I was here,
So now we're replacing it all, which is a more substantial
Okay.
cost.
Okay, I understand.
Mhm.
All right, now, here's the other questions I have. You said that there's 4 uses, people, or bodies that use in the residential, commercial, industrial, governmental, okay?
Mhm.
And I think, and I tried to follow most of your presentation, but I have to take a little more time to process it, but I think you said 30 cents the first year, but it won't be applied across the board. And so I'm wondering, as a resident, I want to know who's going to absorb that 30 cents? Is it also just water? Is it also sewer rate that would go up?
Mhm.
And with the new meters, because I was here for Mr. Ames' presentation, you went from units, one unit being 740 gallons to 1,000 gallons per unit. So I guess for me as a resident and for the rest of the residents to see what is the conversion and what costs, and an example or two, let's say what bills would be, you know, if it's 30 cents, if it's 40 cents per 1,000 gallons, or per 740, or what? Or is it gonna be 60 cents if it's more?
Right. So what we're just trying to show is that, not going into specifics, but for all customers, right? Or I think this is just residential, or this is just residential, right?
30
The six-
cents.
The 690?
Yes, well,
Yeah.
actually, we talked about doing that across the board, the first one, the 30
Okay.
cents, yeah.
Okay.
across the board.
So, but the 690 is just residential, right? That's just the residential cost?
Right,
Okay.
yes.
So we're just showing, so this will be residential. So the cost per gallon for residential is $6.60 right now. So per ordinance, we should have went up 30 cents since the last price increase or the rate increase. So that 30 cents for year one would be across all customers because we need to go backwards. And then the additional increases, we're just showing this specific example. It's just, if we just took the remaining balance that we are behind in residential and divided that over the next 4 years, this is pretty much what you'll get. What we will do when we have, before we go before the board, to make sure that the residents understand, we'll show you what your water bill is today, what it will be after the increase. So you'll know exactly what that would mean on a whatever conversion rate we need to do it, so that everyone understands exactly what that means, right? So this is just for illustrational purposes. This is just residential. We would do that. We would show all classes of customers, be more specific when we were going before, putting an ordinance before the trustees. But this is just,
So are you saying there's gonna be another meeting on this? Because I would have,
yeah.
another meeting in terms of, so the residents know.
We would
Yeah,
have
this
more
is the first.
specifics. Yeah, we would have, yeah,
Yes?
definitely more specifics so that.
Okay, all right,
because
then
the-
I understand.
The trustees, we would have to provide them with more detail as well.
Okay,
Right.
okay, okay. And then I did when Clerk Greer asked about the cash flow and what the profit margin would be. It would be to know what it is now and what we would gain from it as a resident, to say, look, this would also help us when we're going for the loan. We're like at whatever, and we're gonna get this, and we're gonna be able to do whatever the projects you listed, so that it makes sense. You can put some facts to it and details to it.
You're jumping ahead of us here. So,
Okay, well,
so what we wanted to do was be informational right now, right? Because again, before we go before the board, to tell them what would be the cash flows and how we would use those funds, because the main purpose for this, one is that from an accounting standpoint, from an enterprise fund like water and sewage should be recovering all the costs associated with the service that's being provided. That's the first thing, right? So we have just shown and illustrated over the past 10 years that has not happened, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that the result of this, right, and remember I said there's two pieces to it. One is that we need to get the rates right, right? The other thing is we need to address the infrastructure. So what we'll show you in the next couple presentations is how the rate increases will help us to address the infrastructure needs.
so here's my understanding, because I remember asking you when the budget that passed, you said that there was no increase for the water rates included in this particular
not.
budget. So when are you planning to implement this? Are you talking about next year, or are you talking about in 4 or 5 months, you know, in terms of a water increase? Because I think, you know, I know there's more meetings to come, but it would be nice to know 6 months out or 3 months out.
We don't know at this time, right? We don't know exact time frame that we look to do that, but we answered your question in terms of we didn't go into this budget assuming that we were going to do an increase. So anything that we do increase in fiscal 20 would be helping us to solve our problems.
So let me just address that. In this fiscal budget, we didn't have any increases in the water rates. We didn't. But as we go through this process, things do change. So we're looking at, you know, where we are and where we need to be and how we get there. So with this increase, the 30 cent, the projected timeline would be September 1st. But it depends on the conversation that take place and how the board moves forward on what we need to do to resolve that. Then when you look at year 1 through 5, that would take place in the next fiscal year. So to get the immediate effect that we need based off, because we did pass the resolution for the IPA loan, we have to have that revenue source in that for that component. So that would get us to where we need to be temporarily. And then when we go to the next fiscal year, moving forward, we implement the proposed cost. But this purpose of this meeting was to start having a conversation because we've been talking about potential water increase, but we didn't know exactly what that looked like. And what I needed the finance team to do is to go historically on how we got to the position where we are today. And now how do we get from that position and how we move forward and be accountable to the increases. But we have to be proactive, we have to be strategic, and we have to be upfront with people on what that really looks like. So to your short answer, yes, we know the intent is for September 1st. That's the target line, but it's going to take probably another meeting or so to resolve or to get a clear understanding on what that 30 cent look like for right now to get us to the next fiscal year, how we move forward.
Okay, and thank you. But I got one other thing to request, and I do appreciate the finance meetings and so forth, but I also think what would help when whatever the discussion is going to be at the next meeting, if it's going to talk about water rates, so that the residents will come out, because when it's water or when anything's going to go up, they're going to come out, they're going to want to know, and then you're going to have they're going to have a better understanding of what you want to do and being able to ask questions accordingly. So I would like you to encourage you, if you have to send out a robocall for the next meeting to talk about water rates, I'd like to encourage you to do that.
I appreciate that, and we can take that into consideration, Ms. Redmond, but this is why we stream live our finance committee meetings, so that we are transparent and accountable. For those that can't not make these meetings, they have the opportunity to view it later, and any questions or concerns that they have, they can either call my office, the village administrator, or the finance team to get any questions that they have addressed. Those questions that come out of those viewers that watch us online, we can address that in an open format so that the public know what kind of questions we are receiving. So we are very open to the discussion whether a person is here or not physically. You just choose to be here.
And was there any other questions from our residents? So we're good? Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Hicks, Mr. Hood, thank you guys so much for that presentation. We truly appreciate that. If you have anything in closing to wrap it up, because I know we have one more item I need to address, so anything to wrap it up?
I think pretty much everything's been said.
Yeah.
I appreciate some of the questions we got, because there was a couple questions that, what's the amount we've subsidized? I got to even think about that. So to your point, now we have more questions to figure out for the next meeting.
Yeah, I would just want to just continue to make sure that everybody understands that this is twofold, right? It's water rates and in its infrastructure, right? So in the key point is that an enterprise fund from an accounting standpoint is supposed to recover the cost that it of providing the services to the residents. It is not supposed to subsidize the cost of providing that service. And providing the subsidy puts us in the position where we are today. Okay, that's totally separate from solving for the infrastructure piece that we need to solve for. All right.
Good, you ready to return? Get back up here. So you can sit right there? Okay. Again, I want to thank the residents for coming out. Truly appreciate this. I thought this was very informative. My fellow trustees, again, as the mayor said, and she does give us this forum where the other trustees can either watch, just like the residents can watch, because we are streaming live, as well as them having questions. So, you know, our two directors, Director Hicks and Director Hood, have done a wonderful job. I mean, they're always available for us to, you know, we can ask questions all the time and they get back with their answers. So again, they're very accessible. I hope the other trustees, you know, take the advantage of it as well and to ask questions. To the mayor's point, for her to be here, again, you know, that's important because you could see the direction the village needs to do. And I guess, you know, the biggest word, as I always use, and she uses it, is the transparency. We're here to inform so that we can make good decisions that are for the future of this community. You know, and myself, that my family's been here since 1957, myself living here, you know, everybody's concerned. So regardless of what increases are going to take place, you have to remember we ourselves live here, so it also affects us. And again, we want the stability of our community, and you've seen the direction and the turnaround and what's been happening in the last 2 years. So I think, you know, we're having a lot of success, and we want to continue that. We want to keep our industrial park happy, as well as our business owners. And as you've seen at the last board meeting, we have businesses that want to come in here, that want to do something with our community. So we want to show, you know, good faith by keeping things up to par, just like with our police, our fire department, our public works department. But most importantly is that infrastructure. We have to make sure everything's working. So that is important for the success of this community. With that being said, I do want to make an announcement. And I know when Inspector Monks was here a few months ago, he was an inspector talking about a grant that the fire department has pursued and secured for our village, and it does save lives. I want to bring him back up here again and introduce him because now he was recently promoted, but we also have a replacement, and he's going to discuss that as well as where the grant is at. So just so that the residents know at home, if you haven't taken advantage of having the smoke detectors, again, it's still available, and he'll discuss that.
Thank you. All right, my name is Lieutenant Anthony Monks with the Broadview Fire Department. As mentioned, I did receive a promotion. As part of this promotion, the smoke detector program is not going to go away. I consider what we've done just getting our feet wet. What the community needs, we request and will provide. This is a rolling grant that is going to go on as long as our residents deem it as being necessary. And from my point of view, when seconds can make the difference between life and death, something free like this where we can come into your home and replace or install new up to 3 working smoke detectors at no cost to you is outstanding. We highly encourage you to protect yourself and to protect your family. And then second is going to be a new initiative that we're rolling out. It's called the My ID program. Years ago, we did Vial of Life, which was a piece of paper you put on your refrigerator. And if you were sick at home, that was great because I could get your medical information if you are unable to tell me. With today's technology era, if you see on the side of my radio, all of the members of the fire department have participated in this program. It's a QR code, which ultimately means quick read card. It's basically just a fancy barcode, and what this is going to enable us to do is store a medical profile anywhere that can be accessible anytime. It will allow us to get your information, again, when seconds count, in roughly 5 to 10 seconds. We will have your information. What I think is to be very important as well is, who do we contact? If something happens to you, who can we get a hold of to let know? And lastly, this is going to be rolled out at National Night Out, which will be August 6th. This was if we're speaking finances, this was taken out of the risk reduction account for us. And if I were to assimilate this, we're being proactive with this too, because this is very important. It's much like the water, you know, it's reducing our risk now and in the future. I highly encourage everyone to participate. If you have any questions about my ID, feel free to call the fire department, 708-343-6124. And lastly, if you would like to get more information about the smoke detectors, feel free to call our public education officer, which is firefighter Marty Scafidi, at 708-343-6124. And if you have anything else, feel free to stop by. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant, for doing it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, again, to our residents at home and to our residents here, again, it's about being transparent. It's about working together so you can see how we all come together to make the village more successful. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending and viewing at home. I'm going to call an adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. God bless. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.